The collapse rarely begins with an explosion. Most disasters that changed human history started with ordinary mornings, routine conversations, and small warnings buried beneath layers of confidence. In crowded cities, people still opened markets at dawn, ships still crossed busy harbors, governments still issued reassuring speeches, and families still believed tomorrow would look exactly like yesterday. But beneath the surface, systems were already cracking. Engineers ignored structural fatigue, officials dismissed unusual weather patterns, doctors underestimated invisible diseases. Entire civilizations often stood at the edge of catastrophe, while convincing themselves that stability was permanent. And that is what makes preventable disasters so haunting. The tragedy was not only in the destruction itself, but in the terrifying realization that countless lives could have been saved if someone had listened earlier. Again and again, history revealed the same pattern. The warnings appeared first, the denial came second, then came the silence no society ever expects to hear. Long before cities burned or oceans swallowed coastlines, the warning signs usually arrived quietly. Ancient rulers received reports of failing harvests, but chose to protect political image rather than prepare populations for famine. Industrial leaders noticed flaws in machinery, but feared financial losses more than human safety. Entire governments often delayed evacuation plans because acknowledging danger could create panic, economic instability, or public embarrassment. In many cases, the people closest to the threat saw fragments of the truth long before the catastrophe arrived. Sailors noticed unusual tides, workers smelled gas leaks beneath factories, scientists published ignored studies predicting future collapse. Yet history repeatedly showed how institutions built to protect society could become trapped by pride, bureaucracy, and denial. The collapse did not begin with chaos. It began quietly, hidden inside paperwork, delayed meetings, optimistic headlines, and decisions designed to preserve normality for just one more day. In the years before some of the deadliest epidemics in human history, daily life continued with remarkable confidence. Streets remained crowded, festivals continued, and trade routes expanded faster than governments could monitor. But invisible threats were already moving between populations. In medieval ports, infected rats traveled aboard merchant ships while city officials focused on taxes and commerce instead of sanitation. Centuries later, industrial cities expanded rapidly without proper sewage systems, allowing diseases to spread through contaminated water. During the early stages of modern pandemics, political leaders often hesitated to restrict travel or announce the full severity of outbreaks, afraid of economic consequences and public fear. By the time hospitals overflowed and funeral processions filled the streets, the opportunity to contain disaster had already disappeared. And in every era, survivors described the same disturbing memory. The world did not stop immediately. It continued pretending everything was under control, until reality could no longer be hidden. Some preventable disasters emerged not from nature, but from human ambition accelerating beyond caution. During the Industrial Revolution, factories multiplied across Europe and America with enormous speed. Steel bridges stretched farther than ever before. Massive steamships crossed oceans once considered impossible to navigate. Entire cities transformed under the belief that technology itself guaranteed progress. But many of these achievements were built faster than safety systems could evolve. Workers operated dangerous machinery with little protection. Buildings rose using experimental methods never fully tested. Engineers often warned about weaknesses, but financial pressure demanded speed over caution. Then came the failures. Bridges collapsed into rivers filled with commuters. Boiler explosions destroyed entire neighborhoods. Mines trapped workers beneath the earth while rescue teams listened helplessly to fading sounds underground. The disasters shocked the public not because danger had been invisible, but because society had convinced itself innovation alone could overpower human error. Few moments exposed the deadly cost of ignored warnings more clearly than maritime disasters. Before some of history's most infamous shipwrecks, captains and operators received repeated alerts about weather, ice, or mechanical instability. Yet confidence in engineering often created a dangerous illusion of invulnerability. Luxury vessels advertised themselves as unsinkable. Shipping companies pushed crews to maintain record speeds despite worsening conditions. Communication failures delayed critical decisions by minutes that later cost thousands of lives. Survivors described terrifying scenes of orchestras continuing to play while freezing water climbed through hallways designed to symbolize modern perfection. But no one understood what was coming next until panic replaced routine. Lifeboats proved insufficient, evacuation plans collapsed under confusion, and within hours, symbols of technological triumph disappeared beneath dark oceans. Investigations later revealed the same devastating truth repeated across generations. It had been built slowly through arrogance, shortcuts, and ignored precautions. Natural disasters became far deadlier when governments underestimated the force of the environment surrounding them. Coastal cities expanded into flood zones, despite centuries of historical evidence. Forests were stripped away, leaving regions vulnerable to landslides and erosion. Entire populations settled near volcanoes because fertile soil created short-term prosperity. Again and again, economic growth overshadowed long-term safety. When earthquakes struck poorly regulated urban centers, buildings collapsed not only because of seismic force, but because construction standards had been ignored for decades. When hurricanes reached overcrowded coastlines, evacuation systems failed under pressure they should have anticipated years earlier. Survivors often recalled hearing official reassurances only hours before destruction arrived. By the time the signs became clear, it was already too late. Roads became rivers, communication networks disappeared, and entire communities discovered that modern infrastructure could unravel within a single night of overwhelming pressure. Industrial contamination created another kind of preventable catastrophe, one that unfolded slowly enough for denial to survive, even as people grew sick. Toxic chemicals leaked into rivers supplying drinking water for thousands. Factories released invisible particles into the air, while executives dismissed growing medical evidence linking pollution to disease. Entire communities unknowingly lived beside poisoned soil, contaminated groundwater, and unstable waste storage facilities. Parents watched unusual illnesses spread among children, while corporations defended themselves through legal delays and carefully managed public statements. In some regions, residents described strange smells and discolored water years before authorities admitted danger existed. But the disaster did not arrive in one dramatic moment. It expanded gradually through cancers, respiratory diseases, birth defects, and ecosystems collapsing in silence. These were catastrophes measured not by a single explosion, but by generations forced to live with consequences created by decisions made behind closed doors. Nuclear accidents revealed how fragile human control could become once complex systems started failing simultaneously. Inside highly secured facilities, operators trusted layers of technology designed to prevent catastrophe under every imaginable condition. But disasters rarely follow predictable models. Small mechanical failures triggered larger chain reactions. Miscommunication spread to control rooms where seconds mattered. Emergency procedures designed in theory collapsed under real panic. Investigations later showed that engineers had identified vulnerabilities years earlier, but economic pressure and institutional pride delayed necessary upgrades. When radiation escaped into surrounding regions, governments initially minimized the scale of contamination to avoid public panic. Families remained exposed while officials debated statistics and political consequences. Entire towns would later stand abandoned, frozen in time beneath invisible contamination. Schools, homes, toys, and photographs remained exactly where people left them. The silence surrounding those places became a permanent reminder that technological confidence can collapse faster than anyone expects. Transportation disasters often expose the terrifying consequences of routine negligence. Aircraft maintenance delayed to reduce costs, railway systems operating with outdated signaling equipment, bridges inspected superficially while corrosion spread beneath the surface. In many tragedies, investigators discovered that multiple small warnings had appeared before the final catastrophe. Pilots reported unusual behavior in aircraft systems. Mechanics documented unresolved technical issues. Local officials raised concerns about aging infrastructure. Yet the pressure to avoid delays, expenses, or public alarm repeatedly outweighed caution. Then came the moment when ordinary routines turned fatal. A train entered a curve too fast. An aircraft lost control mid-flight. A crowded bridge collapsed during rush hour. Survivors described confusion more than immediate fear, because disaster often arrived in places people associated with safety and familiarity. The horrifying truth emerged afterward. Many of the deadliest transportation tragedies in history were not sudden accidents. They were slow failures ignored until physics made denial impossible. The social consequences of preventable disasters often lasted far longer than the destruction itself. After epidemics, survivors carried deep distrust toward governments that concealed information or acted too late. After industrial accidents, entire communities faced unemployment, displacement, and contaminated environments that could not easily recover. Families spent generations remembering relatives lost not only to disaster, but to negligence. In many societies, public anger transformed into protests, political revolutions, or sweeping legal reforms. Safety regulations written in blood became part of modern civilization because countless previous warnings had been ignored. But even after reforms, the pattern continued repeating across different eras and technologies. Human beings consistently struggled to respond to gradual danger with the urgency required to prevent catastrophe. Fear of economic loss, political instability, or damaged reputation repeatedly delayed action until collapse became unavoidable. History showed that civilizations often recognize disaster clearly, only after they are already living inside it. What makes these catastrophes especially disturbing is how ordinary the final moments often appeared before everything changed forever. Families shared meals hours before floods erased entire towns. Workers entered factories during routine shifts, unaware toxic leaks were already forming. Citizens boarded trains, airplanes, and ships, expecting ordinary journeys that would become historical tragedies. The transition between stability and collapse was rarely dramatic at first. It was subtle. A strange vibration beneath the floor, a delayed emergency announcement, a smell of smoke no one immediately understood. Then came confusion, followed by panic, and finally the irreversible realization that systems trusted for decades had failed in minutes. Survivors frequently described not heroic certainty, but disbelief. Human beings struggle to accept collapse while it is still unfolding. The mind searches desperately for normal explanations even as reality begins breaking apart. And that hesitation, repeated across history, often became part of the disaster itself. Modern civilization likes to believe it has learned from the failures of the past. Satellites monitor storms across oceans. Scientists model pandemics before they spread globally. Engineers simulate structural failures using powerful computers. Yet many of the same vulnerabilities remain deeply embedded inside modern systems. Governments still delay difficult decisions when economies are threatened. Corporations still minimize risks that could reduce profits. Populations still ignore long-term dangers, while daily life feels comfortable and familiar. Climate instability, infrastructure decay, cyber vulnerability, and overcrowded urban systems continue creating conditions where preventable disasters remain possible on enormous scales. The technology has changed, but the psychology behind collapse often remains identical. The belief that catastrophe belongs to another place, another generation, another society, until suddenly it does not. Until ordinary life begins cracking under pressures ignored for far too long. History never presents collapse as a distant myth. It presents it as a recurring pattern built from warnings, hesitation, and human refusal to believe disaster could truly happen before tomorrow arrives. Every ruined city, abandoned town, contaminated landscape, and mass grave carries the same silent message across centuries. Most catastrophes did not emerge from complete unpredictability. Somewhere someone noticed the danger early. Someone wrote reports. Someone issued warnings. Someone tried to stop what was coming. But systems built on denial often move too slowly against accelerating threats. And when collapse finally arrives, societies look backward, searching desperately for the exact moment everything could still have been changed. That may be the darkest truth hidden inside preventable disasters. The final catastrophe is rarely the beginning of the story. It is simply the moment when ignored reality becomes impossible to deny any longer.